So students, now we are going to start this very interesting chapter that is called heredity and evolution. So students, you will enjoy a lot while studying this chapter, and this is an important chapter as well. So first of all, we need to understand what is the meaning of heredity. What is the meaning of heredity? So students, let me talk about you. See students, you must be similar to your mom or similar to your dad. Right students, when a new child is born, we say that okay, he looks like his dad, he looks like his mom, right students, his face is like his dad, his eyes are like his mom, and so on students, right? So the basic point which I'm trying to make is that offsprings look like their parents, right? Not exactly, but pretty much. Now this phenomena, this thing is called heredity. This thing is called heredity. So we can define heredity like this. So heredity is the phenomena of transfer of features or traits from parents to offsprings or progeny. Progeny also means children. So heredity is the phenomena of transfer of features or traits from parents to offsprings or progeny. So I hope students you have understood briefly what is the meaning of this word heredity. We'll see about this in great detail in this chapter. Now let me tell you what is the meaning of evolution. So for that students, look at this photograph. So this is a very interesting photograph students. Look at this last photograph in this series. This is a human being of today students. This is a human being of today. And students, what is this? This is an ape. So students, as you must be knowing that long back in history we were actually like this. Then changes happened in the body of this ape and it became like this, then it became like this, then it became like this, then it became like this, and today we are like this. So this process of change in an organism students is called evolution. It's called evolution. We can define evolution students. So evolution is the process of formation of a new organism from an old one by gradual changes, as you can see here. So a new organism has been formed today students from this old organism by gradual changes over a period of time. Now before we actually move deeper into this chapter, I must tell you this students that previously we have studied this chapter that is called reproduction. Right students, reproduction. Now if you remember this chapter, at least to some extent, then it will be very easy for you to understand this chapter which we are going to study, heredity and evolution, right? A prior knowledge of this chapter, at least to some extent, is necessary students. So I will highly recommend that if you don't remember this chapter, maybe you have studied very long time before, so you may not be able to remember it now. So in that case, you should revise this chapter students first, and then only you should go deeper into this chapter, right? Okay, so let me start this chapter now. So students, now variation during reproduction. So students, while studying the chapter of reproduction, we have already seen that when organisms reproduce, there is variation. In asexual reproduction, the variation is less students, and in sexual reproduction, the variation is more. We also saw the reason behind it. What was the reason students? Can you recall? In asexual reproduction, there is only one parent. In sexual reproduction, there are two parents. Now, because of the involvement of two parents, the variation is more. Okay, students. So, let me describe you this variation in detail using this photograph, students. So, students, this is some organism. Now, this organism is producing two offsprings. So, students, you can see that this offspring is pretty similar to the parent. So its the features of the parents have been transferred to the offspring, isn't it students? Right? Because of the most of the features, as you can see, are similar. But students, there is some variation. There is some variation which we are talking about, right? Similarly, in this another offspring also, most of the features have been transferred, but there is some difference, students, right? Now, students, this offspring will also grow and reproduce later on. So it reproduces these two offsprings. Once again, you can see that most of the features of this organism is being transferred to this. Most of the features of this offsprings, this organism are being transferred to the offspring. But obviously there is some difference, there is some variation, right students? Similar is the case here. Students, right? So you can see that when offsprings are reproduced, most of the features are transferred in the offsprings, but there are some variation. Now students, by looking at this diagram, you can understand both the concept of heredity as well as evolution. Now let me tell you how. See students, this was a parent. Most of its features have been transferred to the child. Now when this becomes parent, once again most of the features are transferred to the child. Now this phenomena of transfer of features to child from parent is called heredity. Students, right? You understand the point? Now let me describe evolution. See students, though most of the properties are being transferred, but there is some variation, right? Once again, most of the properties are being transferred, but there is some variation, right students? So in every generation, some variation is there. Now students, after this generation, there will be next generation, then there will be next generation, then there will be next generation, and so on. So students, you think like this, that after millions of years, after many years, the generation which will come will be very different from this initial generation, isn't it? The generation which comes after millions of years will have many differences compared to this original generation. Why so students? Because in every generation some variation is coming, some variation is coming. So all those variations will accumulate. Right students? So this generation later on will be very different from the initial generation, and this process called evolution. So this generation will look very different from this initial generation, and this is called evolution. Okay students, now this variation which comes generation after generation is actually very important, and we also have discussed about its importance in the chapter reproduction, but let me recall that here. So basically variation is necessary for very long survival of a species, right students? Do you recall this? Let me explain you once again. So students, this is Mother Earth, okay, and let's take example of bacteria students. There are a lot of bacteria which reside on Earth. There are lots of bacteria residing on Earth students. In fact, bacteria is one of the oldest organisms living on Earth. Students, and they have survived for such a long period of time students. And due to this students, they have undergone a lot of evolution, as I described you here. They have undergone a lot of evolution, and if you look at different type of bacteria residing on Earth, you will find a lot of variation in them. Some bacteria will have some properties, some bacteria will have some properties, some bacteria will have different properties. Okay students, and why that is the case? Because of the evolution students. So there are different type of bacteria residing on Earth. They have different properties. Now this is actually very good for them. This is actually good for their survival. Let me explain you how. So students, now think that on Earth there is a big calamity. Students. You know what is calamity? Calamity is a very bad situation in which a lot of organisms actually die. Suppose there's a flood, there's an earthquake or something like that. So students, let us imagine that an asteroid is hitting Earth. This is also a calamity. Suppose an asteroid, a big asteroid, hits the Earth's surface. It can happen students. It has happened even in past. Now if something like this happens, what is going to happen on Earth? Earth will become very hot. Its temperature will rise a lot. It will become very hot. It will be very difficult for organisms to live in this high temperature. Now students, consider a hypothetical situation in which all these bacteria are same. There is no variation in them. So suppose such an hypothetical case that there is no variation. Okay students, so this is a hypothetical case, but because actually there is variation, so we just want to see that what will happen if there is no variation. So suppose all these bacteria are exactly same, their properties are same, there is no variation in them. What will happen students? See, in this case, if few bacteria are able to survive in this high temperature, then all the other bacteria will also be able to survive. Why? Because all have the same properties. So if some can survive, all the others will also survive. But students, if some die, all the others will also have to die in this high temperature because they have the same properties, right? So students, there are two possibilities in this case. Either all live or all die, right students? Either all of them are going to survive or all of them are going to die. So students, you can clearly see here that there is chance of elimination, chance of extinction, right students? So because if all of them die, then bacteria will be over from earth forever. Bacteria will be gone from earth forever, right students, if all of them die. But students, in reality, there is a lot of variation in these bacteria, right students? So what is going to happen, that some of the bacteria may be very strong, they may be able to survive in this high temperature. However, the rest of the bacteria may not be able to survive in this temperature, right students? So this is a more realistic situation which will happen. Some of the bacteria may have such strong properties that they will be able to survive in high temperature, rest will die. But this is good enough students, because once the situation on earth becomes good, these bacteria will once again grow and spread throughout the earth, right? So you can understand that this variation is necessary for survival, right students? And students, these variations are not there only in bacteria, but they are there in all the organisms that are living on earth, students. Even human beings, students. Even in human beings, there are a lot of variations, students. You can see some human beings are very tall, some are very short, they have different heights. So this is a variation, students. Then there is variation in colors. Some have dark skin, some have fair skin, some have whitish skin, some have very fair skin, right? So there is variation in color of human beings. Then there is variation in the color of hair, students, right students? Then there are lots and lots of types of variations in human beings. You can look at nose. Students. Some people have this very pointed type of nose. Some people have this different type of nose. Some people have this flattish type of nose. Then this type, right? So this is variation, students. This is variation. This is a very good example of variation, students. See, this part of ear is called earlobe. This part of ear is called earlobe, students. As you can clearly see in this photograph, the earlobe is detached from the face. And this part, in this photograph, you can see that the earlobe is attached to the face, students. So some human beings have such an ear and some human beings have such an ear. So this is a very good variation you can see, right? You can actually do this experiment. Look at the ears of many people around you. You will find some cases like this and some cases like this. So there are a lot of variations even in human beings. Similarly, you take any organism, there will be a lot of variations. So now students, there are two parts of this chapter. Part 1 will be called heredity and part 2 will be called evolution. So students, now we are going to fully focus on heredity. Okay students. So heredity. So students, here the first question which we need to answer is how traits are transferred. So we have seen that heredity basically means that traits or features are transferred to children from their parents, right students? Now how these traits are transferred from parents to a child, students? So see, every organism is actually made up of cells, right students? Every organism is actually made up of cells. Now this is a very elementary structure of cell. The most important part of cell is, student, what? Tell me, what is the most important part of cell? This is the most important part of cell and it is actually called nucleus, right students? The nucleus is the most important part of any cell. Inside this nucleus, there are chromosomes. We have studied about this in previous chapters, in previous classes. I hope you can recall this. Inside nucleus, there are chromosomes. Chromosomes are like thread-like structures. Okay students. Inside these chromosomes, there are DNA. They are DNA molecules, students. And then inside this DNA, we have genes. G-E-N-E-S, genes. Now this is that important thing, students, which is actually responsible for transfer of traits from parents to children, students. It is due to these genes only that children look similar to their parents. So students, these genes are responsible. They are responsible for inheritance. They are also sometimes called units of heredity. Okay, students. And then there are different genes for different traits or different features. So students, please try to understand that these genes present inside the cells are actually responsible for transferring characteristics of parents to their children. How they do this job, we'll see. But before that, let us focus on this point, students, that different genes are there for different traits. For example, students, let's talk about a feature of human being called height. You can see, students, some human beings are tall, some are short, right? So there is variation, students. Now this variation in height is controlled by genes. So in the body of human beings, in the cells of human beings, there are some genes which control height, of a human being, Then students, another trait of human being can be color, students, color of skin. So there are specific genes to take care of color. So there are different type of genes to take care of height. There are different type of genes in the body to take care of color. Then another trait which we have just seen about human beings is the type of nose. So there will be different type of genes to take care of the shape of nose in human beings, right? So I hope you understand what I'm trying to say here. Different genes for different traits. So there are a lot of genes in the body of an organism. Some of the genes will take care of the height, some of the genes will take care of the color, some of the genes will take care of nose, some of the genes will take care of different things. Now see, students, these genes, they work in pairs. You'll understand, don't worry. These genes work in pairs. So for example, let me talk about this trait, that is height of a human being. So if we talk about height, there are specific genes to control height. So the genes which control height exist in two different forms. You understand? The genes which control height, they exist in two different forms. One of the forms will be denoted by capital T, another form will be denoted by small t. So you understand my point? That height in a human being will be controlled by some specific type of genes. Now this gene will have two different types or two different forms. One form will be denoted by capital T, another form will be denoted by small t. This gene is responsible for making somebody tall, and this gene is responsible for making somebody short. You understand? This gene, this capital T, is called dominant gene, and this small t here is called recessive gene, right? We'll soon understand the meaning of these two terms, students. Now in any human being, students, there will be two genes corresponding to height. So those genes can be like TT, TT, TT or TT. So in a human being, there may be two genes related to height and both of them may be capital T. In some human beings, there may be two genes related to height and one may be capital T, another may be smaller t. Or maybe in some humans there will be two genes like this, or maybe in some human beings there may be two genes related to height, both small t. You understand, students? So that's what I'm saying. Genes work in pairs. Right? So if we are talking about height, there will be two genes related to height in any human being. Now because there are two types of genes relating to height, so either in a person they can be capital T, capital T, small t, capital T, or small t, right? So if a person has these two genes in his body, he will be tall. Because both these genes are going to try to make the person tall. So the man will be tall. If a person has these two genes in his body, the person will be short. You can understand, students, because this is the gene of making a human being short. But students, what happens in these two cases where one gene is capital T, another is small t? What happens? See, students, you will be surprised that even these two cases, the person will be tall. Why, students? See, when there are two genes, then the dominant gene will actually decide the characteristic. When there are two genes, then the dominant gene will decide the characteristic, and the recessive gene will not be able to do anything. You understand? But only when there are two recessive genes, it can control the property. It will make the person short. You understand? Right? But if one is capital T, one is small t, because capital T is dominant, so it will rule and it will make the person tall. Same is the case here. So students, we can actually define this dominant and recessive gene. See, dominant gene is the gene which decides trait even in presence of other gene. Right, students? You understand? So dominant gene is a gene which decides trait even in the presence of other gene, as it was happening here and here, that this dominant gene was deciding the trait, was deciding the property of organism even in the presence of this other gene. Right, students? Now how can we define recessive gene? So recessive gene is the type of gene which decides trait only in presence of identical gene. Only in presence of identical gene. Right, students? So recessive gene can decide property only in presence of an identical gene. So you can see this case. This recessive gene is able to decide property only in the presence of an identical gene. But in the presence of another type of gene, this recessive gene is not able to decide the property. Right, students? Another important thing, that this dominant gene is always written in capital letter. Right? And recessive gene is always written in small letter. Right? So you can see this is capital T, this is dominant gene, this is small t, that is recessive gene. Now students, few more terms. One term here is called genotype, and another term here will be called phenotype. So what is the meaning of genotype and phenotype? See, genotype means the pattern of gene. Pattern of gene. So we'll say this is a genotype, this is a genotype, this is a genotype, this is a genotype. Right? Because this is a pattern of gene, TT, capital T, capital T. This is a pattern of gene, capital T, small t. This is another pattern of gene, small t, capital T. This is another pattern of gene, small t, small t. So this will be called genotype. Right? So when we are talking about genotype, we are talking about the pattern of gene or the type of gene present in the human being or any other organism. Phenotype basically means characteristic in the organism, right, students? So these are phenotypes, tall or short. So these are characteristics of organism. So we'll say, students, in biological terms, we talk like this, that this genotype produces this phenotype, just this genotype produces this phenotype, this genotype produces this phenotype, right? So if somebody asks you phenotype, you have to tell the characteristic which will be shown in the organism. If somebody talks about genotype, he is talking about the pattern of genes in the organism. See, students, I understand that these concepts may not be that clear to you right now, but believe me, in the next 10 minutes, this concept will be so clear to you that you can teach it to anybody. So for that, let us take this example, students. The color of hair in human beings vary. It can be blonde, or it can be black, students. Okay, so there will be genes in the body that will control the color of hair. So students, color of hair. So color of hair in human beings will be controlled by genes. because genes work in pairs. So there are two genes. One is capital H, another is small h. These two genes will control the color of hair in human beings. This capital H makes the hair black, and this small h makes the hair blonde or whitish. Okay, students. Clearly you can see this is capital H, so this is dominant. This is a dominant gene, and this is small h, so this is actually a recessive gene. Right, students? You understand the point? Right. So color of hair in human beings will be controlled by two genes, as genes work in pair. This is capital H, dominant gene, which will make the hair black. This is small h, which will make the hair blonde. So students, let us do this question. Suppose in a person the genotype or the gene pattern is capital H, capital H. Suppose in some another person the gene pattern is small h, small h. Suppose in some another person the gene pattern is capital H, small h. Right, friends? So this is a genotype. Okay. So we have to predict the color of hair. We have to predict the color of hair in this person, and this person. You understand the question? In some person there are two genes relating to color of hair. They are capital H, capital H. In some other person it is small h, small h. In some other person it is capital H, small h. So we have to tell what will the color of hair. So can you tell me, students? Tell me. So I think, students, you must be able to find the right answer. In this case, both the genes are capital H, capital H. Capital H is responsible for black hairs. So in this case, the person will have black hair, students, as you can see in the case of this lady. In this case, students, both the genes are small h, and a small h is responsible for blonde hairs. So this lady will have blonde hairs. This person will have blonde hairs, right? Now the trick is, in this case, students, one gene is capital H, another gene is small h. Then what happens in this case, students? This is a dominant gene. This capital H is a dominant gene. So it will decide the color of hairs. So if it decides the color of hairs, the hairs have to be black. You understand? So in this way, genes decide the property by existing in pairs. We can do one more question here, students. Look at this lady. She has blonde hairs, and look at this lady. She has black hairs, students. So we have to tell the genotype in this lady and the genotype in this lady. So we have to tell the type of genes in this lady and the type of genes in this lady. Can you do that, students? It's very simple. See, students, there are only four possibilities, right? There are only four possibilities. What are those possibilities, students? Capital H, capital H, capital H, small h, small h, capital H, small h, small h. Right, students? If this is the phenotype, then the color of hair will be black, right, students? If this is the phenotype, the color of the hair will be white, which is basically blonde. And in these two cases, what happens, students? In these two cases, what happens? The color of the hair is black. This capital H is dominant gene, so that will decide the color. This capital H is a dominant gene, so that will decide the color. And according to that, the color should be black, right, students? So if this is a genotype, either this or this, the color is black, right, students? Now you can clearly see that white hairs are possible only in this case, only in this genotype. So it is guaranteed that in this lady, the genotype is HH. Right? So both the genes present in the lady are small h. But what about this lady, students? Here we cannot be sure because there are three options, right? She has black hairs. So black hairs are possible even if the genotype is this, even if the genotype is this, even if the genotype is this, right, students? So that is the answer. In her case, we'll say the genotype is this. In her case, we will say that there are three possibilities, this, and this. Fine, students. Are you getting the point here? What is happening? Let us do some more questions, more situations, and the point will be even more clear. So, dear students, look at these two photographs, right? She is a lady with blonde hairs, and this is a guy with black hairs, right, students? Now, this lady has genotype of H, small h, right? Am I right, students? You should check. Yeah, this is right. And this man had genotype of capital H, right? Is it possible, students? Yeah, it is possible. If he has both capital H, definitely his hairs will be black, students, right? Now the situation is that these two people together reproduce and form a child. These two people together reproduce and form a child, students. Now we have to guess that what will be the color of hairs in the child. What will be the color of hairs in the child? The mother has blonde hairs, the father has black hairs. So what will be the color of hairs in the child, students? That is what we have to think of. So this is an interesting problem, students. What is the color of hairs of their child? Okay, students. So how can we think of it, students? See, when they reproduce, what will happen? An egg will come from the lady, an egg will come from the lady, and a sperm will come from the male, right, students? These are the sex cells. These are the sex cells. We have seen this in the previous chapter, students. When they reproduce, egg will come from the lady and sperm will come from the male, right, students? Now see, this egg, which is a sex cell, will have only one of these two genes. So obviously it will have a small h, right, students? Because both the genes are small h, right? So this egg, this sex cell, will have only one of these two genes, right? So obviously it has to be small h. Similarly, this sperm will also have one of these two genes, so obviously it will have capital H, right, students? So this is also an important point, students. Sex cells have only one gene. Sex cells have only one gene. This is also an important point which we had seen in the chapter of reproduction towards the very end. If you don't remember, you can watch the video once again. Towards the very end in that chapter, I have told you this point. And even if you don't remember, you can understand it now, that sex cells have only one gene. So egg is a sex cell, so it will have only one of these two genes. Sperm is a sex cell, so it will have only one of these two genes, right? So the egg coming from the female has only one gene, small h, and the sperm coming from the male has only one gene, that is capital H. Now what happens next, students? These two cells combine to form what, students? Zygote, right? You know that. They combine to form zygote. Now obviously this zygote will have this small h and this capital H, right? And this zygote is actually going to develop into a child, right, students? So basically this child will have this genotype, small h, capital H, right? So what do you think? What will be the color of hairs? What will the color of hairs of the child? What do you think? The genotype is this. So what will the color, students? Can you guess? Obviously, students, you understand that this is the dominant gene. This is a dominant gene, so the color will be black. As you can see in this photograph. So a child like this will be born, students, right, with black hairs, right? So see, this is very interesting, students. This is very interesting. We can predict that if they produce a child, the color of hair will be black. The color of hairs will be black in the child. Now, students, let us take one more case, students. Here, the lady has black hairs and the male has blonde hairs, right, students? And it is given to you that the genotype of lady is capital H, small h. Possible, students? The genotype of the lady can be capital H, small h. Think about it. This is the dominant gene. So this is dominating and making the hairs black. Okay, students. Now, this male has this genotype. Okay, both are small h, right? So his hairs are white. Okay, now what happens if they reproduce? Students? So see, egg will come from the female side, sperm will come from the male side, right? And these sex cells will have only one gene. Okay, students, these sex cells will have only one gene. So this sperm, students, will have only one of these two genes. So obviously it will have a small h because both are small h. But what about this egg, students? This is egg and this is sperm. What about this egg, students? This egg will have only one of these two genes. Right? So which gene? So maybe it will have this gene or maybe it will have this gene. We cannot say that, right? It's a matter of chance. This egg may have this gene or this gene. So this egg will have only one of these two genes and it can be any one of them. It's a matter of chance. So suppose the egg has this gene, small h. So in this case, students, once again they are going to form zygote. right students? And this zygote will have this gene and this gene, so small h and a small h, right? And this zygote is actually going to develop in the child. So you now understand that what is the color of hairs of the child? What is the color of the hair of the child? Small h, small h. Obviously students, blonde. Obviously blonde. Like this, right students? So if these two people reproduce and form a child, the child can have blonde hairs, right students? But students, I'm sure that you are able to understand that in this case there is one more possibility. There is one more possibility. Why there is one more possibility? See, the sperm will have this small h gene, but this egg can also have capital H. This egg can also have capital H, right? And if that is the case, then the zygote formed will have one capital H and one small h. And in this case, what do you think about the color of hairs of the child? One gene is capital H, another gene is small h. What will happen in this case? Something like this, black hairs. Black hairs. So students, you can understand that if these two people reproduce, the child so formed may have blonde hairs or may have black hairs, right students? But if these two people reproduce, the child must have black hairs, right students? You understand the reason? The reason is the genotype. Reason is the genotype present in the parents, right? Here the genotype was small h in one parent and capital H in the other parent. Here the genotype is different. One parent has a small h similar to here, but the other parent has one capital H, one small h, right? So here the genotype of parents is different compared to the genotype here. So in both the cases, different outputs are possible. I'm sure students, you are finding it very interesting. Let us do one more example, students. Now students, let us take this example, students. Now she is a lady with genotype capital H, small h, and this is a male with genotype capital H, small h, students, right? Possible. See, here the dominant gene is capital H, here also the dominant gene is capital H, and that's why they have black hairs. Now, obviously the question is once again the same, that if these two people reproduce together, they form children together, what will be the color of their hairs? What will the color of their hairs, right? If they form children together, what will the color of their hairs? Right students? See, in this case, there can be many possibilities, students. In fact, 4 possibilities. Let me draw that. So see students, these are the 4 cases. Case 1, 2, 3, 4. See, now this is the egg, this is a sperm. They fuse together to form zygote, right? This is the egg, this is sperm. They fuse together to form zygote, right? This egg will have only one of these 2 genes, so maybe it has capital H. This sperm will have only one of these 2 genes, maybe capital H, right? This is one possibility. The other possibility is that H here, small h here. Another possibility is small h here, capital H here, and another possibility is small h here, right students? So these are the different possibilities. So clearly you can understand that there are 4 possibilities, right? In this case, the zygote will have genotype of capital H. In this case, the genotype in the zygote will be this. In this case, small h, capital H, right students? You are able to think in this case both are small h, so both will be small h, right students? Now these zygotes only will grow into children, right students? So if the zygote has this genotype, obviously the color of the hair will be black, right students? If this is the genotype, once again the color of the hair will be black. In this case, tell me, see capital H, that is dominant, so it will make the hair black. In this case students, both are small h, both are recessive genes, so the color will be blonde students, right students? So students, look at these photographs. So such children can be reproduced when these two people breed. When they produce children, they may be like this, right? The hair may be black in color, once again black in color, or blonde in color, right students? So you understand, if these two people reproduce, the child may have this genotype or this genotype or this genotype or this genotype. So if they produce a lot of children, some will have this genotype, some will have this genotype, some will have this genotype, and some will have this genotype, right students? So you understand what is going on here, students? I am sure students that things will be very clear to you. So students, I'm sure you are finding all this very interesting. I also find all this very interesting. So basically, there is a branch of biology or a branch of science, you can say, that is called genetics. That is called genetics. In that branch, we study all such things in greater detail, students, right? Obviously, in this chapter also, we are going to see these things in more detail, but in genetics, these things are studied in great detail, students, right? So what is genetics, students? Genetics is a branch of biology in which we study about genes in great detail. Okay.